The first strike came without warning. It wasn't the roar of fighter jets or the thrum of artillery fire that signaled the invasion. It was the silence. At dawn, Earth's skies darkened as vast, ominous ships descended like shadows. Massive black vessels with gleaming alien surfaces appeared from the upper atmosphere, blocking the sun. People on the streets stopped in their tracks, staring up in disbelief. The sudden quietness felt like a breath held in time, a sense of dread seeping into every heart. Phones lit up with emergency alerts, but they were no use. There was no escape. In major cities across the world, chaos erupted as the Xathrians initiated their attack. Cities were plunged into darkness as energy grids were swiftly disabled. Military forces, despite their readiness, were overwhelmed by the alien technology. Laser beams shot from the skies, reducing skyscrapers to molten ruins. Entire battalions of tanks and infantry were obliterated in seconds, as if Earth's military might was nothing more than a child's toy to be crushed underfoot. Overlord Tazir watched the carnage unfold from his command center aboard the largest of the Xathrian ships. His cold, calculating gaze reflected no sense of hesitation, no remorse. To him, the invasion was a simple matter of conquest. Earth was weak, divided, ripe for the taking. The Xathrians had long set their eyes on this planet, watching from the shadows, and now it was theirs to claim. "I've waited for this day," Tazir muttered, voice like a razor's edge, "and now, Earth will be ours." Ground troops began to land, their suits designed to withstand Earth's harsh atmosphere. They emerged from the ships in sleek, dark exoskeletons, moving with precision as they began to secure key locations. The streets were littered with debris and the wounded, their bodies limp as they lay under the weight of their lost world. There was no resistance from the military worth speaking of. Humanity was unprepared for an invasion on this scale. Amidst the rubble of New York City, a small group of civilians had gathered in a hidden basement. It was there that Dr. Elena Martin a scientist who had been working on high-level defense projects for the government, looked at the flickering screens around her with a mixture of fear and determination. She was surrounded by engineers and former soldiers, their faces grim. Their lives, like everyone else's, had been turned upside down by the Xathrian invasion. But Elena's mind raced, her training kicking in. She knew that if Earth had any hope of survival, it was going to take more than brute force. The key, she realized, was in human adaptability, the very trait that had allowed humanity to overcome every obstacle in its history. "We may be outmatched," she said, her voice steady despite the circumstances, "but we have something they don't, our ability to innovate. We can fight back. We must." A chorus of murmurs rose from the others. The military was gone, their power shattered. The world governments were collapsing under the weight of alien domination. There was no time to waste. Elena quickly got to work, pulling out old blueprints and research she had stashed away, weapons systems that hadn't been fully tested. The resistance wasn't about to go down without a fight. Meanwhile, across the world, the first human casualty reports came in. News stations, now powerless, could barely broadcast what was happening. The alien forces systematically wiped out entire cities, creating an atmosphere of fear and helplessness. In London, Paris, Tokyo, and Buenos Aires, the same sight played out: civilians running, soldiers retreating, and the Xathrians tightening their grip on the Earth's most valuable locations. But amidst the overwhelming destruction, humanity's true nature began to show itself. Whispers of a resistance movement spread quietly at first. Refugees banded together in hidden shelters. People who had once been ordinary, unaware of the future coming for them, began to stand up. And in the quiet corners of the world, a new fight was about to begin, one that no alien force could predict. As the dust settled over the ruins of a once thriving world, Earth's battle for survival was only just beginning, and humanity would soon learn that the real war had yet to come. As Earth lay in ruins, the Xathrians continued their ruthless campaign. sweeping across the globe with the precision of a well-oiled machine. Cities fell, governments crumbled, and entire populations were either captured or slaughtered in the wake of the alien advance. The world had been plunged into despair, and it seemed there was no hope left. But even in the darkest corners of the planet, something began to stir. In a small underground bunker hidden deep beneath the wreckage of what was once Los Angeles, Dr. Elena Martin sat hunched over a makeshift workstation. The hum of old computers filled the air as she and a small group of scientists scrambled to piece together any information they could about the Xathrians. The resistance, in its earliest and most fragile form, had begun to take root, but they were still far from organized. Elena knew that time was running out. The Xathrians had already begun their plan to enslave humanity, using them as labor to build their empire, but she refused to accept the idea of surrender. "Elena, you've been at this for hours," said Victor, a former military engineer who had joined the resistance after narrowly escaping an attack. His voice was laced with exhaustion. "You need to rest. We all do." She shook her head, eyes bloodshot but focused. "Rest won't save us. We need to understand how they think. We need to find their weaknesses." Elena turned her attention back to the screen in front of her, where a series of Xathrian blueprints flickered on the monitor. She had spent weeks deciphering the alien technology, and every breakthrough felt like a tiny victory. The Xathrians were incredibly advanced, no doubt, but they had not anticipated humanity's ingenuity. Elena's mind raced as she dug deeper into their weapon systems, trying to find any crack she could exploit. "It's not about matching them in strength," she muttered to herself. "It's about outsmarting them." Victor watched her, unsure if it was desperation or sheer brilliance driving her. But there was something undeniable in Elena's voice, a conviction that, despite all evidence to the contrary, humanity could still turn the tide. Meanwhile, outside their underground shelter, the world was changing. As alien-controlled zones expanded, pockets of humanity began to fight back in their own way. Rogue groups of civilians, doctors, engineers, farmers, and soldiers formed small resistance cells, each operating in secret. They were armed with nothing but scraps of weaponry and the knowledge that they were fighting for their lives, but they had a fire within them that the Xathrians couldn't extinguish. In the ruins of New York, Captain James Holloway, a former elite soldier, led a guerrilla operation that sabotaged key Xathrian infrastructure. Holloway's unit was small, only a handful of men and women, but they moved swiftly and silently, leaving destruction in their wake. They hit supply lines, knocked out alien communication towers, and freed prisoners who had been captured in the initial wave of the invasion. Each small victory added fuel to the fire of resistance. It wasn't much, but it was enough to show the Xathrians that Earth was not as easily conquered as they had believed. Over time, Elena and her team began to make strides. The scientists in the underground bunker used the data they had collected to reverse engineer a few key pieces of Xathrian technology. They couldn't match the aliens in terms of firepower yet, but they had discovered something far more valuable. The Xathrians were arrogant. Their overconfidence had led them to overlook humanity's greatest strength, adaptability. The aliens had failed to account for the human ability to innovate, to think on their feet, to find solutions in the most impossible of situations. One fateful day, Elena and her team achieved a breakthrough. They had discovered the Xathrians' vulnerability. It wasn't in their technology or their weapons. It was in their energy sources. The Xathrians had built their entire empire on a series of massive energy conduits that spanned the globe, feeding power to their ships and weapons. If the resistance could somehow disable or destroy these conduits, they could cripple the alien forces. Elena shared her discovery with the others, and for the first time since the invasion, there was a flicker of hope in their eyes. "We can't defeat them with brute force," Elena said, gathering her team together. "But we can disrupt their infrastructure. We can hit them where it hurts. This is how we start turning the tide." In the days that followed, a network of resistance cells began to coordinate their attacks. Each group would target a different conduit, using whatever they could to cause the most damage. It was a dangerous mission, one that had no guarantees, but it was a chance. The stakes couldn't be higher, but for the first time, humanity had something the Xathrians didn't: the will to fight back. And with that spark of hope, the resistance began to grow. The Xathrians were no longer unchallenged conquerors. They had underestimated Earth, and now they would soon learn that humanity was far more dangerous than they ever imagined. Despite the growing efforts of the resistance, the Xathrians remained confident. Overlord Tazir watched Earth from the command center of his flagship, perched high above the burning remains of the planet. The resistance, though brave, was a mere annoyance. Their sabotage of supply lines, the small raids on isolated Xathrian outposts, none of it mattered. The Xathrians had crushed humanity's major cities with overwhelming force. Tazir was certain that Earth's defenses were shattered. The humans would never recover. Foolish creatures, Tazir muttered to himself, eyes fixed on the planetary map. They do not know their place. They will bend to our will. He was right. At least for now. The aliens had made Earth their playground, and every day brought a new wave of terror. Yet, unknown to the Xathrians, the resistance had been learning and adapting faster than they expected. Every attack brought fresh insights into the alien technology, and it wasn't long before the humans started to fight back with more precision. Captain James Holloway, now one of the leaders of the resistance, had watched the world crumble around him. New York, once a beacon of human achievement, was now a wasteland. But the fight for survival had reignited something in him, a sense of purpose that he hadn't felt in years. Holloway was not just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for humanity's place in the universe. As the resistance's tactics grew bolder, Holloway called for a major strike against one of the Xathrian supply hubs in the Midwest. The mission was a gamble, a high-risk operation that could either deal a crippling blow to the invaders or result in total annihilation. But Holloway knew one thing: there was no turning back now. If humanity was to stand any chance, they needed to show the Xathrians that Earth was not an easy conquest. Under the cover of darkness, a small group of resistance fighters, armed with stolen Xathrian technology, infiltrated the supply hub. The compound was heavily guarded, with drones patrolling the perimeter and alien soldiers stationed at every entrance. But the humans knew how to use their surroundings to their advantage. They were familiar with Earth's terrain, and while the Xathrians had the superior firepower, humanity's ingenuity had always been its greatest weapon. The operation unfolded like a well-oiled machine. Holloway's team disabled the communication towers, ensuring the Xathrians would be blind for hours. They set explosive charges on the power conduits, targeting the very infrastructure that kept the alien forces operational. It was a brilliant move, one that caught the Xathrians completely off guard. But the battle wasn't without cost. The resistance fighters encountered heavy resistance, and several of them didn't make it out alive. Holloway, though, pressed on, guiding his team with relentless precision. By the time the Xathrians realized what was happening, it was too late. The supply hub was in ruins, and the blast sent shockwaves across the region, crippling a significant portion of the invaders' ability to launch coordinated attacks. Back in their underground base, Alina watched the live footage of the explosion with a mix of triumph and sorrow. The blast was a symbol of humanity's determination, but it came at a cost. The resistance had succeeded, but they had lost many good men and women in the process. Still, it was a victory. The Xathrians had underestimated them, and the tide was beginning to shift. The news spread like wildfire. Around the world, other resistance groups took heart from the success of Holloway's mission. In defiance of their alien oppressors, civilians started taking a stand. Small victories, freed prisoners, disabled weapons, destroyed communication hubs, began to add up. The Xathrians might have had superior firepower, but humanity had something they hadn't counted on: the will to never give up. Meanwhile, Tazir, from his flagship, watched as the data streamed in about the destruction of the supply hub. His face twisted in frustration. "They're learning," he hissed. "How can this be? We have crushed entire planets before, and now these humans fight back. It doesn't make sense." Tezir's anger was palpable, but in his mind, the conclusion was clear. The resistance was nothing more than a brief flicker in the dark. Soon, he would crush them entirely. He would crush Earth. But Tezir was wrong. The human spirit, once ignited, could not be so easily extinguished. The more the Xathrians tried to break the resistance, the stronger it became. Every loss, every sacrifice only made the humans more determined. The battle for Earth was far from over, and the real war had only just begun. The Xathrians had underestimated the humans, but they had learned from their mistakes. Tezir, enraged by the destruction of the supply hub, shifted tactics. His forces would no longer merely conquer, they would wipe out every last trace of resistance. He issued a direct order to launch a full-scale assault on the remnants of humanity's strongholds, intent on crushing the growing fire of defiance once and for all. On the ground, the resistance had its first taste of what the Xathrians were capable of when they stopped playing with their prey. Holloway's team, fresh off their small victory, had barely begun to regroup when the first wave hit. The Xathrians, using their advanced scanners and strategic brilliance, pinpointed every resistance cell's location with frightening accuracy. What was once a patchwork of hidden safe zones suddenly became targets. In the ruined streets of Chicago, a resistance cell made their stand at an old military base. It had been a perfect hiding place, until now. The ground shook beneath their feet as alien war machines stormed through the city. Hover tanks, drones, and Xathrian shock troops flooded the streets in a relentless, unstoppable wave. The humans, although vastly outgunned, fought with everything they had: improvised explosives, stolen energy weapons, and sheer desperation. They had learned how to adapt, how to fight on their terms, but nothing could prepare them for the full might of the alien onslaught. "Hold the line," shouted Sergeant Leo Greer, the leader of the Chicago cell. His voice cracked with the weight of their mission. "We fight for our homes, no matter what." The resistance fighters fought with an intensity that surprised even the Xathrians. They used the terrain to their advantage, setting traps, collapsing buildings to create barricades, and sniping from high ground. But for every alien they killed, two more took their place. It wasn't long before the resistance realized they were being overwhelmed. As Greer led his team through the chaos, the air thick with smoke and the scent of burning ruins, he knew they couldn't hold out much longer. His heart pounded in his chest as he signaled for a retreat. They would live to fight another day, but this battle had been lost. Back in the underground bunkers, Alina watched the live feeds of the battle unfold. Her stomach churned as she saw the resistance fighters, many of them friends and comrades, fall in the face of the Xathrians' unrelenting advance. Holloway, now commanding a larger part of the resistance, issued orders for a tactical withdrawal. The soldiers retreated to the old subway tunnels, hoping to regroup and escape the Xathrian pursuit. It was a painful decision, but necessary. The humans had suffered heavy losses, but they had learned something crucial in the heat of battle. They were not without hope. Despite the overwhelming odds, they had forced the Xathrians to work for their victory, and in that moment of retreat, Alina felt a strange sense of optimism. This war was far from over. Meanwhile, Holloway's mind raced. As the resistance pulled back, he realized something vital. If the Xathrians were this effective in battle, then the humans had no choice but to outthink them, not just outfight them. There had to be another way to counter the aliens' overwhelming firepower. "I need every engineer and scientist we've got," Holloway said, his voice firm. "We've learned how they fight. Now we need to turn their strengths into their weaknesses." In the coming days, Holloway and Alina would work together to formulate a new strategy, one that didn't rely on brute force. Holloway knew they needed to hit the Xathrians where it hurt, not just on the battlefield, but in their core infrastructure. The resistance couldn't afford to fight conventional battles any longer. They needed to find new weapons, new methods to strike back at the heart of the Sathrian Empire. Back on the front lines, the Exathrians continued to push forward, unaware that they had just awakened a much greater threat than they had anticipated. The resistance, bloodied but unbowed, was beginning to forge something far more dangerous than they realized, a force that would use everything the Exathrians overlooked against them. And soon, that force would take the fight to the very heart of the alien empire. The days following the disastrous battle in Chicago were marked by uncertainty, but there was a sense of determination in the air. The resistance, battered and scarred, had retreated to safer locations, underground bunkers, hidden caves, and forgotten military outposts. They had lost key fighters, but they had also gained something vital: insight into how the Xathrians operated and what would be required to fight back effectively. It was time to think differently. Dr. Elena Martin, exhausted but resolute, stood before a makeshift map of the planet. She traced her fingers over the glowing lines marking the alien-controlled zones, the regions that had once been bustling hubs of human life. The Xathrians had crushed the cities, but humanity wasn't gone yet. If anything, the attack on Chicago had sparked a fire in the survivors, urging them to adapt or perish. There was no middle ground. They had to be smarter. "We need to hit them harder and faster," Elena said, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "We can't afford to let them consolidate their power any longer. We need to disrupt their supply lines, their energy sources, everything that keeps their war machine running." Victor, the former military engineer, nodded. He was busy tinkering with one of the stolen Sathrian weapons, trying to reverse engineer it into something more human-friendly. The resistance had taken a page from the Sathrians themselves, using their technology against them. But it wasn't enough. They needed to go deeper. They needed to strike at the heart of the Sathrian operations. "Disruption won't be enough," Holloway said, entering the room with a weary look on his face. He was the hardened commander of the resistance, but the weight of the losses at Chicago was heavy on his shoulders. "We've learned a lot, but we need to move beyond sabotage. The Xathrians are relentless. We need to put the fear of human will into them. We need to cripple their command structure." Elena's mind raced. "We don't just need weapons. We need a strategy. We've been playing their game, reacting to their moves. It's time we make them react to us." And that's when it clicked. Elena had been studying the Xathrian communication systems for days, piecing together fragments of intercepted transmissions. While the aliens were technologically superior, they were still bound by their reliance on a central command. It was an old weakness, one the humans could exploit. The Xathrians' command center, their heart, was located on a massive space station orbiting Earth. If they could take it down, if they could sever the alien command structure, the entire invasion would crumble. But it was a dangerous mission, one that would require everything the resistance had. They needed to get close to the space station, infiltrate it, and destroy its core systems. A single slip-up would mean the end of the resistance, but if they succeeded, the Xathrians would lose their ability to coordinate, to control their forces. The room fell silent as Elena, Holloway, and the other leaders of the resistance weighed the risks. It was their last chance. "We can do it," Holloway said finally, his voice full of steely resolve. "We hit them where it hurts. We strike at their command center. If we pull this off, it'll be the turning point. We'll bring the fight to them." The plan was set in motion. Holloway would lead a select group of elite soldiers to infiltrate the Xathrian space station. Elena, working closely with Victor and a team of engineers, would help modify their weapons to stand a chance against the alien defenses. Every step was fraught with danger, but the resistance had no other choice. Weeks of preparation followed. The team trained relentlessly, learning the ins and outs of Sathrian technology. They had to be swift, precise, and deadly. Meanwhile, Holloway worked tirelessly to gather intelligence, coordinating with various resistance cells across the globe. The mission had to be kept a secret. If the Xathrians got wind of it, they would be ready. Finally, the day arrived. The Resistance fighters, clad in a mix of human and Sathrian tech, set out on a daring assault. The spacecraft they had reproposed was stealthy, designed to bypass the alien patrols. As they approached the space station, every fighter's heart beat in sync. This was the moment where Earth's fate would be decided. In the heart of the space station, the Sathrian overlords remained oblivious to the human threat that was about to infiltrate their ranks. Their confidence was their undoing. As Holloway and his team neared the command center, they moved silently, cutting through the station's defenses one by one. It was their first true direct assault. No more hiding, no more running. Humanity was going on the offensive. The battle that would decide Earth's future was about to unfold. And this time, it was the Cathrians who would find themselves on the defensive. The cold silence of space surrounded Holloway and his team as their stealth ship glided closer to the Sathrian space station. The craft's cloaking system hummed faintly, masking their approach from the station's sensors. Inside, the team of Resistance fighters was tense, each of them focused on their role in the mission. They knew the stakes. Failure meant annihilation, not just for them, but for every human still fighting to survive on Earth. Approaching the station in 3 minutes, whispered Jenna, the ship's navigator. Her voice was calm, but the tension in the air was palpable. She had been in the Resistance from the beginning, and her skills were unmatched. But even she knew this was a mission that stretched the limits of what they could handle. Holloway stood up from his seat, the weight of his responsibility heavy on his shoulders. This mission wasn't just about taking down a structure. It was about breaking the Sathrians' grip on the Earth. It was the culmination of everything they had fought for, every life lost, every sacrifice made. We hit them fast. We hit them hard, Holloway said, his voice steady. We can't afford any mistakes. Everyone knows their role. Stay sharp. Alina, seated next to him, nodded in agreement. She had worked with the engineers to modify their weapons, adding layers of adaptability to their stolen Sathrian tech. Their aim wasn't just to infiltrate, but to cripple the station's communication systems before the aliens even realized what had happened. The station loomed large ahead of them, a sprawling, jagged structure suspended in the vast emptiness of space. It was a fortress, designed to withstand almost anything. Yet, despite its imposing size and formidable defenses, Holloway's team had one advantage: the element of surprise. The ship docked with one of the station's lesser-guarded docking bays. As soon as the hatch opened, the team disembarked, moving quickly and silently through the corridors. Their boots echoed faintly in the metal hallways, but no alarms sounded. For now, they were still undetected. Their first task was to reach the central control room. The station was a maze of metallic tunnels and chambers, but thanks to the intelligence gathered by the Resistance, they had the blueprints. Alina led the way, her sharp eyes scanning the walls for any signs of Sathrian patrols. I got visual on the control room, Alina said quietly into her comm unit. We're almost there. But just as they neared the final stretch, the team encountered their first real challenge. A group of Sathrian soldiers rounded a corner, their eerie, insect-like forms glinting in the dim light. They were moving in groups, clearly on high alert after the sabotage of several key supply hubs across Earth. The Resistance's actions hadn't gone unnoticed. The humans held their breath, pressing themselves into the shadows. Holloway's hand went to his weapon, ready to strike, but he paused. A fight here would jeopardize everything. They couldn't afford to be detected. Alina's mind raced. She glanced at the team and then back at the Sathrians. With a subtle gesture, she indicated they should fall back to a side corridor. The team quickly complied, keeping low and out of sight. As the Sathrians passed, their heavy footsteps echoing down the hall, the Resistance fighters exhaled in relief. That was too close, Victor muttered, his voice a little shaky despite the calm of the others. But Holloway gave a single nod, acknowledging the danger they had just avoided. Stay sharp, Holloway ordered, his voice calm but with a sharp edge. We're almost there. The team moved deeper into the station, making their way to the control room, which was now in sight. The door was heavily guarded, but they knew they couldn't take the direct approach. This would be the most critical part of the mission. Elena tapped into the station's systems through a handheld device she'd modified earlier. "I can disable the security grid for 5 minutes," she whispered. "Once it's down, we'll have enough time to get in, plant the charges, and get out." With a few keystrokes, the door's security panel flickered, and the door to the control room slowly hissed open. The team entered swiftly, taking out 2 unsuspecting guards with precision, using non-lethal force to avoid raising alarms. Inside the control room, the heart of that Sathrian operation pulsed with activity. Alien soldiers moved between consoles, monitoring systems, and coordinating strategies for Earth's occupation. But all of them were unaware that the very thing that held their power was being torn from under their feet. Holloway signaled for his team to split up and plant the explosives. Elena worked quickly, using her knowledge of the station's systems to plant the devices on critical power conduits. Time was running out. Victor, meanwhile, hacked into the communication system. "I got their comms," he said, a grin creeping onto his face. "Let's see how they like being blind." The countdown began. The resistance team moved toward the exit, their hearts pounding. The station's core systems would soon be in ruins. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the station. "Go! Go! Go!" Holloway shouted, pushing them toward the docking bay. The battle for Earth was entering its final, most dangerous phase, and the fight had only just begun. The alarm screamed throughout the station, a shrill warning echoing in the metallic halls. Holloway's pulse quickened as the sound reverberated in his ears, but there was no turning back now. The explosives were in place. They had only minutes before the Exathrians realized the magnitude of the breach. Their advantage, element of surprise, was quickly slipping away. "Get to the docking bay, now," Holloway shouted, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around them. The team moved with precision, adrenaline pushing them forward as they navigated the now hostile station. The once silent corridors were alive with frantic Exathrian soldiers rushing to lock down the station and find the intruders. The resistance fighters had been discovered, but their mission was nearly complete. It wasn't just a strike on a building. They had hit at the very heart of the Sathrian command, and the clock was ticking down to 0. As they reached a junction, a wave of Sathrian soldiers turned the corner ahead of them. Their insectoid eyes gleamed with hostile intent. Holloway's team immediately took cover, weapons ready. "Hold your fire," Holloway ordered, his voice urgent but calm. He could see the Xathrians hadn't spotted them yet, but the situation was too delicate. A confrontation here would guarantee their capture, or worse. Belina, crouched behind a pillar, looked around quickly for an escape route. Her eyes locked on a small maintenance hatch to the left. "Through there," she whispered. "We'll be able to bypass them." Holloway nodded, signaling the team to follow. They moved swiftly, slipping through the hatch one by one. It was a tight squeeze, the metallic corridors narrow and cramped. But it was their best chance to avoid detection. For a brief moment, they all breathed easier as they made their way down the maintenance tunnels. The sound of Sathrian footsteps faded as they put distance between themselves and the soldiers. Still, the danger wasn't over. They were deep inside the station now, every step bringing them closer to the docking bay, but also deeper into enemy territory. "We've got 5 minutes," Victor said, tapping into the station's systems again. "The station's power core is about to go critical. I've locked down some of their security measures, but it won't hold forever." Elena glanced over at Holloway, who nodded grimly. "No time to waste. Let's move." As they pushed forward, the team's senses were on high alert. The low hum of the station's artificial gravity was the only sound around them, aside from their own breathing. Their pace quickened as they reached the final corridor leading to the docking bay. The tension was unbearable. They had to make it there, and fast, before the whole station went up in flames. Then, Just as they rounded the final corner, they were confronted with a sight they hadn't expected. An entire squad of Sathrian shock troops, blocking the docking bay entrance. These soldiers were the elite, heavily armored, and armed with pulse weapons capable of devastating human forces. They stood at the ready, weapons trained directly on the path Holloway and his team would take. It was an ambush. They had been waiting for them. "Take cover," Holloway shouted, his voice carrying an edge of urgency that sent the team scattering. They dove into the narrow alcoves along the corridor, taking refuge behind pipes and support beams. The Sathrians opened fire, their weapons pulsing with deadly energy. The resistance fighters responded, returning fire with their own modified weapons, but the Sathrians' armor was nearly impenetrable. Holloway fired back, his mind racing. They had to get through this. "Elena," Holloway shouted over the blaring chaos. "We need that hatch open. Now." Elena's fingers flew across the small device she carried, hacking into the station's systems again. A few seconds passed, each one feeling like an eternity. She had to bypass the security locks, or the Sathrians would cut them down before they had a chance to escape. "I'm in," Elena said through gritted teeth, sweat dripping down her forehead. The doors opening. Just as the heavy metal door to the docking bay creaked open, the Sathrians closed in, forcing the team back with another barrage of fire. But with the door now ajar, there was a brief window of escape. Holloway motioned to his team. "Move." The resistance fighters sprinted toward the door, weapons raised to provide cover fire. The Sathrians, realizing the humans were escaping, intensified their assault. The air crackled with energy as blasts exploded around them, but Holloway led his team through the door, and they ran into the docking bay. Inside, their spacecraft waited, just as they had left it. The pilot, Jenna, was already in the cockpit, preparing for a hasty takeoff. "Get in," she yelled, voice tight with urgency. The team bolted toward the ship, dodging fire as the Sathrians closed in. Holloway was the last to reach the hatch. He slammed the control panel to seal the door behind them, just as a final shot from the aliens ricocheted off the ship's hull. "Lift off, now," Holloway ordered. The engines roared to life, and with a sharp jolt, the resistance craft shot out of the station, breaking free of the Sathrian grip. Behind them, the station's massive structure flickered as the charges planted earlier began to detonate. A brilliant explosion lit up the station, sending shockwaves through space. The Sathrians' command center was no more. The mission had succeeded. For the first time, the resistance had dealt a devastating blow to their invaders. But Holloway knew this victory was only the beginning. The battle for Earth was far from over. The stars outside the spacecraft's viewport shimmered as Holloway and his team watched in silence. The Sathrian space station, once a symbol of their dominance over Earth, was now a burning husk, its twisted remains scattered across the cosmos. It had been a massive victory for humanity, a message sent to the invaders. Earth was not yet conquered. But the victory was bittersweet. Holloway's mind was heavy with the knowledge that the war was far from over. The Sathrians still controlled vast portions of Earth, and their forces were far from depleted. The destruction of their command center had been a blow, but it had not shattered their resolve. Now, the true test lay ahead. How would humanity capitalize on this victory? Elena, sitting at the communications console, was the first to break the silence. "We need to send a message to the rest of the world," she said. "This isn't just a victory for us. It's for everyone." Holloway nodded, still gazing out the window. The Earth below was a patchwork of scars and cities in ruin. The human spirit had survived, but only just. And now they had to inspire the rest of the world to rise up and finish what had been started. "Victor," Holloway said, his voice low but steady, "how much of the Sathrian communication network can you tap into from here?" Victor, still catching his breath after the harrowing escape, turned to Holloway. "I can broadcast on their frequency, but it's risky. They'll be monitoring their systems more closely after what we've done. If we broadcast a message, It'll get their attention. That's the point, Holloway said. We need to rally humanity. Let the world know that we're not done fighting. We're just getting started. Victor hesitated, but the weight of the moment settled in. With the right message, they could inspire a global resistance. Earth had already bulled for freedom. It was time to give it one final push. We're doing this, then, Victor said, nodding as he began typing furiously at his console. The ship's communication system hummed, and soon, a secure channel was opened to broadcast their message across Earth. Meanwhile, Elena turned to Holloway. What's our next move? We can't just hide out and wait for the Xathrians to regroup. We need to go on the offensive. Holloway thought for a moment, his gaze fixed on Earth's surface. The fight had changed after the destruction of the station. There was no going back. They had struck at the heart of the Xathrian operations, but now the rest of the world had to rise with them. The humans had to take back what was theirs, and that meant striking wherever the Xathrians were weakest. The next step is a global strike, Holloway said. We've got cells in every major country. We've got to coordinate a series of attacks on their remaining strongholds, hitting them hard and fast. We won't give them time to regroup. Elena nodded. And we need to cut off their reinforcements. We've got to make sure the Xathrians can't get supplies or backup from their other systems. Holloway turned to the rest of the team. This isn't just about tactics anymore. This is about rallying the last bit of humanity's will. They need to know we have a plan. They need to see us fighting back. If we can take a few more strongholds and continue to disrupt their supply lines, we might just break their resolve entirely. Victor, now connected to the Xathrian network, turned to Holloway. The message is ready. It's encrypted and ready for global transmission. Holloway took a deep breath, his hand steady despite the weight of the moment. This was it. They were taking the fight directly to the heart of the Xathrian invasion, showing the world that humanity would not bend. Broadcast it, he commanded. The ship's communication system hummed as the message was transmitted to every corner of Earth. On screens around the globe, a familiar face appeared, Holloway's. His eyes were dark, but the fire of resistance burned in them. This is Colonel Daniel Holloway of the Earth Resistance, his voice echoed, calm but filled with determination. Today, we struck a blow against the invaders who sought to enslave our world. The heart of their empire, their command center, is no more. We are not conquered. We are not defeated. We are not alone. Every day, more of us rise up to reclaim our planet. A shot of Xathrian wreckage followed, their space station crumbling under the weight of the human resistance. Our fight has just begun. We will take back what is ours. Earth is our home, and we will never give up. To every human still resisting, to every fighter still holding their ground, we are with you. Together, we will win. The transmission ended, leaving a lingering silence across the globe. Holloway exhaled, his mind racing. He had given the world a rallying cry, but it was only the beginning. There was still so much more to do. In the quiet of the ship, Elena turned to him. Do you think it will be enough? Will the world really rise? Holloway met her gaze, his expression unyielding. It has to be enough. If we don't rise together, we'll fall separately. The Xathrians won't stop until we're wiped out. But we're not done yet. The final stand starts now. The team prepared to re-enter the fight, knowing the coming battles would determine the future of their world. The resistance was no longer just a group of rebels. They were the spearhead of humanity's last chance. The fight for Earth had entered its final, most crucial phase. The war was far from over, but this time, humanity was fighting on their terms.